Hi there. Today I'm taking a look at what I hope will be a quintessential Barossa Shiraz. So we're in Australia, South Australia particularly, and this is Krondorf's Symmetry Shiraz. It's the 2014 vintage of that. And at the stage that this was made, Symmetry was Krondorf's top wine. They've now replaced the brand with something they call 121 Settlers Shiraz. But the name Krondorf evidently means Crown Village, commemorates the fact that in 1847 a group of 121 Silesian settlers came to live in the southern part of the Barossa Valley. And from them, a lot of the winemaking heritage of that area has grown. I mean, for instance, the Henschkes, who are famous for their Hill of Grace, came at their predecessors came at this stage. Peter Lehmann's ancestors also were part of this group of early settlers. Amongst this group there were a family called the Falkenbergs, and they'd planted vineyards, and because a lot of these settlers planted vineyards just to making wine for their own family, but the Falkenbergs ended up building a winery that they called Glenview, and this continued on until the late 1970s. In 1978, when it was bought by Grant Burge and Ian Wilson, so two young ambitious winemakers, sort of eager to be leading members of the revolution of making sort of top quality table wine in the Barossa Valley, and they were very successful early on. Their 1979 vintage won the Jimmy Watson Trophy, which is probably the top trophy on the Australian show circuit for a one-year-old red wine in 1980. So having got success in the show circuit with medals, etc., they were able to sell the winery to Mildara Blass, who continued the brand, making sort of very typical Barossa wines. However, when Mildara Blass came to want to sell the winery in 1999, Grant Burge bought it from them. He went on to sell it to Accolade, another large wine group, who again continued making high quality, typical Barossa Valley wines until earlier this year, when they were planning on closing it. So in the first few months of 2022, Grant Burge bought Krondorf actually for the third time. It turns out it's close to his home, and obviously it's convenient for him. But it's great to see this very historic brand remaining in an appropriate ownership. So there we go. I don't know a lot about this wine, I have to say. I know it's been aged in French and American oak. I understand that it's come from vineyards of old vines, so I'm expecting concentrated fruit. I'm not expecting much in the way of fancy winemaking. There should be some oak influence, and there's a little bit of age. I mean, this is a nearly 9-year-old wine. So let's take a look at it, shall we? First of all, the colour. The colour has a wonderful intensity. It's virtually opaque. I can just about make out the stem of the glass peering through it, but only just. First of all, looking at it, the rim has a sort of a purple mauve hue to it, and it does keep the colour very well right up to the rim. It's not a vibrant blue purple, but then it's not a young wine. And there is this sort of red to black core there. As I swirl it, there are some quite powerful tears forming on the glass, and that's reflective of the fact that the wine has quite a lot of body, and the fact that the label says it's 14.5% alcohol. So I'm expecting a fair amount of power from this wine. Let's have a look at the aromas. Here you've got a combination of two things. There's a really ripe, dense fruit and it starts as almost a slightly perfumed raspberry note, and then gets into a much deeper, darker plum to prune to dark prune, damson sort of notes there. So really intense fruit, but over the top of that there is an earthiness, a leatheriness that's much more savoury, much more developed, much more tertiary, and is stopping the fruit from being overly juicy and takes the primary element out of it. There may also be sort of a little bit of pepperiness. It's not heavily peppery, and a tiny touch of sort of cedary spice there as well. So let's taste. An awful lot of what you see on the, or what I was describing on the nose, is in the palate as well. It's rich. There are plentiful tannins. They've got a velvety, bordering on the sort of grainy nature. They're fine, but they're quite smooth. They're not particularly drying or astringent. The fruit has this sort of core of dark damson fruit, almost a black cherry, but there is the lovely sort of lifted, fresh raspberry, boysenberry sort of notes that are a bit more juicy on the finish. The acidity is balanced. The alcohol adds some warmth to it. I mean, I say balanced is enough to give freshness to the fruit, but it's not really particularly sharp on the finish or anything like that. This is warm, rounded, inviting. I mean, it's fully mature. Those leathery notes are coming through as the on the finish as the wine dries out a little at the finish, but actually in general the red fruit, the dark fruit of the core have overcome that on the palate. There's a nice length of flavour, and maybe I've underestimated the acidity because there is some freshness on the finish still. Yeah, big wine, quite nicely balanced, presenting plenty of fruit, really very typically Barossa Valley in style. So yeah, very interesting drink. As I say, the Symmetry, not made these days. It's been replaced by a wine called 121 Settlers, but you may still see it on the secondary market. You may still see it in some retail outlets that have still got stock. Certainly worth a go. Thanks for listening. Do watch again. Bye now.